Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. This is Monday. I appreciate you being with me. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma, and this is what I call my morning musings. Well, we're taking a look at what Paul said in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 in his discussion of the resurrection. Pardon me. Paul said the resurrection would be at the end. It is assumed by all futurist views that what Paul means there is the end of the Christian age, or the end of human history, the end of time, none of which doctrines are to be found in the New Testament or the Bible. But be that as it may, the question is the end of what? This is a legitimate question. Well, Paul tells us the end of what? In 1 Corinthians 15, 55 and 56, when he says it would be the end of the law that was the strength of sin. Now, I've shared with you that in numerous formal debates, I have asked my opponents to define the law that was the strength of sin. Almost invariably, they have said it was the law of Moses. Well, I can tell you this. Once they were entrapped by their own answers, for instance, like David Hester in my two debates with him, 2016, 2017, just like many, many other of my debate opponents, all of a sudden, in the debate, they completely changed their position. Now look, folks, I have no problem whatsoever in changing my position, my beliefs, if there is sufficient evidence. But I've got to have the evidence. So when someone tells me, well, I've changed my view on the definition of the law that was the strength of sin, my philosophy on that is, okay, that's fine, what's your evidence? But when that change is made right in the middle of a formal public debate, or it's made in the middle of a written Facebook debate, or in the middle of a personal conversation, then I know that a person is not changing their view based on evidence, based on logic, based on exegesis or hermeneutic. They're changing their position to escape the fact that they've just destroyed their own theology. Now, the question obviously is, what in Pauline thought was the law that Paul himself described as the strength of sin? Here's a really, really powerful fact that you need to know. The term, the law, honomos, in the Greek, and by the way, in many translations, especially in the book of Romans, translators omitted the definite article that is there in the Greek. Yeah, that's kind of troublesome, isn't it? Nonetheless, in Paul's writings, he uses the term the law. That is, law with the definite article. 117 times. Now, catch the power of this. There are only 10 times in which Paul uses the term the law to refer to some other law other than the law of Moses. But here is the kicker. The way and the reason that we know that Paul is using that term, the law, in a way different from the law of Moses, is because he defines the law that he's talking about. Allow me to read for you Romans chapter 8, verses 1 through 3. There is therefore now no condemnation to those who are in Christ Jesus, who do not walk after the flesh, but after the Spirit. Now watch this. For the law, now if we stopped right there, and if we omitted the rest of what Paul said, then, hey, we would be left to conjecture and say, oh, well, this is the law that Paul's talking about in 1 Corinthians 15. No. And by the way, Romans 8 is a resurrection text. A resurrection text. So now watch this. The law of the Spirit of life in Christ Jesus. Well, if it's the law of the Spirit of life in Christ Jesus, is it also the law that was the strength of sin? Is it the law that condemns? Yeah, no, that's not going to work really well. Okay, so here is a use of Paul of the term the law. It's not referring to Torah. It's referring to the gospel of Jesus Christ. And it's not the law that was the strength of sin. Okay, now watch this. The law of the Spirit of life in Christ Jesus, oh, this is so powerful, has made me free from the law of sin and death. Wow. Okay, so here's Paul once again using the term the law in a way different from the law of Moses. I have more to say about that in a follow-up video. But the law of the Spirit of life has made me free from the law of sin and death. Well, what's the law of sin and death? Very simply, it is the law that said, you sin, you die. It's the law of the garden. The law of the garden. Of every fruit, of every tree that is in the garden, you may freely eat. But of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you may not eat thereof, because in the day you eat, you will surely die. You sin, you die. The law of sin and death. Now watch this. For what the law, no definition, no explanation, no modifier, no qualification, what the law could not do, in that it was weak through the flesh, God did by sending His own Son to in the likeness of sinful flesh. On account of sin, He condemned sin in the flesh. So we have three laws right here in Romans chapter 8. The law of the Spirit of life in Christ, the law of sin and death, and the law. The law of sin and death stands right square in the middle. Watch this. The law could not deliver from the law of sin and death. So, the law is not the law of sin and death. And the law could not deliver from the law of sin and death. But then you have the law of the Spirit of life in Christ that does deliver from the law of sin and death, something that the law could not do. Three laws. And Paul's unqualified, undefined, unspecified use of the law demands in this context, just as it does in 1 Corinthians 15, that the law, in Pauline thought, when he does not define it differently, when he does not qualify it, when he does not define what he means by the law. For instance, bear you one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ, Galatians 6:2. Let me reiterate. Paul uses the term the law 117 times. Only 10 times does he not refer to it as the law of Moses. So, the use of the preponderant use of the term the law in Paul is a reference to the law of Moses. If you are going to make the argument in 1 Corinthians 15 that the law, that was the strength of sin, was not the law of Moses, then you're going to have to prove that beyond a shadow of a doubt in violation of Paul's overwhelming use of the term the law as referent to the law of Moses. Can we establish that the law in Pauline literature, the law without a qualifier or defining explanation, is the law of Moses? Yes, we can. It's easily done. And we'll do that on the flip side. We'll see you there.